This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington, and welcome to Late Boomers. I'm here with my co-host, Mary Elkins, and we're welcoming a new guest to our podcast, author, songwriter, and recording artist, Dennis Welch, who at 69 years old has just released his latest album titled Strong.
And I'm Mary Elkins. After composing over 500 songs, recording and performing live worldwide, he says that if he could wave a wand on how the world would remember him, he would choose just one word: storyteller. Welcome, Dennis. We're looking forward to hearing your story.
Well, thank you, ladies. Thank you for having me on. And I love telling this story, and I always hope that it's encouraging to people, especially of a certain age, right? That that you're really never done, kind of thing. And so we'll get to that. But I appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And please tell us about your early years and when you started writing songs. Was it a family music tradition in your family?
Well, my family loved music. They loved particularly country music. And I grew up, I spent every weekend at my grandmother's, and she had a little green plastic radio that she turned on it way before daylight, and she would get the farm report, and she lived right in the middle of Houston. I thought, why is she doing this? Right? I mean, Grandma, come on, you don't need to do that. But eventually she got a farm. Even in her 60s, she did. But anyway, and so my family loved music, but nobody really played an instrument. And so and I loved listening to the radio, and I had certain songs that I liked, but the idea of writing songs it never occurred to me. And but I've always been a word guy, and so I could read and spell before I started school. And my mother had me tested. So I went to the University of Houston. They tested me. They did some tests at the elementary school, a little inner city elementary school that I went to. And I remember distinctly going to the principal's office with my mother before school started, and Ms. McRee, and I remember her because of what she did for me. But anyway, in this moment, she was very imposing, and she handed me a book, and she said, "Okay, read that page, Dennis, and then close the book and tell me what you read." And so I did that. And when I finished reading it and telling her what I'd read, she looked at my mother and she said, "He does not need to be in the first grade or the second grade. He needs to start in the third grade. So let's move him up to the third grade." My mother said, "No, he already likes to play ball and sports, and he probably won't want to play against kids that are bigger than him. And so maybe there's another accommodation that you can do." And so anyway, on day one of the first grade, I'm sitting in my first grade class, and, I just got there. And it was time for the reading circle. And in steps Ms. McRee, and she called my name and said, come with me. And I thought I was in trouble. Anyway, we went out in the hallway. I thought, I just got here, I'm already in trouble. So she held my hand. I remember this. She held my hand and she walked me down to the school library. And I had never been in a library. And we walk into this, it looked cavernous, but it was probably just a little elementary school library, right? And so we walk over to the far wall, and there's all of these children's books along there. And she says, "Look, every day when your reading circle meets, come down here, excuse yourself quietly, come down to the library, and you can read. These are for first, second, and third graders." But then this was the real crazy thing. We turn around and we look out at the library, and she says, Uh, and by the way, you don't have to read The Cat in the Hat. You can read anything in the library. And so by the time I got out of the sixth grade, I had read all the works of Mark Twain. I read. It was such a gift. I read. The first time I was really moved by a book was Charlotte's Web, and I thought, wow, you can make people feel that with words. I want to try to figure out how to do that, right? And so anyway, I was always a word guy. And then when I was about maybe 17, I was driving home from a date. And one of the themes, ladies, that you will hear in this conversation is that throughout my life, people say, oh, this is just dumb luck. Your life is a random sample of events and all this stuff. But for me, I really can't believe that, because the right person has shown up at the right time for me exactly when I needed them. And so this is the first example really of that, musically was I write this song driving home from a date, and I was singing it in my car and trying to remember it. And it had verses and a chorus. And I'm like, that's cool. That's kind of a song. Now, what do I do with it? Right. So the next day I went into my little job. I worked full time, and I was going to school, full time. And the guy that I worked for always kept his Ovation guitar under his desk. And so I sang the song all day because there weren't these that you could record something on quickly. Right. And so at the end of the day, he says, what is that song you've been humming all day? And I said, well, it's a song I wrote, driving home from a date last night. And he goes, well, let's play it. And he takes his guitar out and he plays and sings the song with me. And that was that. I was like, wow. And he said, hey, Dennis, this is a real song. And you know what? You should see if there's more of this that you can do. So go buy a cheap guitar, learn a few chords, see what happens. And I tried to learn chords, but as I learned chords, I could hear in the air. I heard the story, I heard the lyrics, and I started writing songs almost immediately. And and then eventually, I started recording some of that stuff, and getting out and playing and all that. And every bit of that was encouraging.
That's
exactly
such a
what I
great
needed.
story. It sounds like you were born that way. You're a musical genius. But
well, I don't know about genius, but I am musical.
But you're tapped into where it comes from. You're tapped into the universe to hear it.
Well, and the thing is, you know what? I worked for the Gallup organization for 13 years. And right when they were changing from being a not very profitable polling, but well-known polling company to the consulting juggernaut they became with StrengthsFinder and Engagement and all the stuff they did. And I was standing outside of a meeting room one day with the late Don Clifton, the grandfather of positive psychology, inventor of the StrengthsFinder. He had climbed every mountain, basically. There was nothing left for him. He was around 80 at the time. And so everybody walked away from us and went in the room and left just me and him. And it was never just me and him. He was always had a crowd around him. I said, hey, Don, look here. I said, it's just you and me. I said, tell me the most profound thing you can tell me in 2 minutes before we walk in there. And he got a big smile on his face, and he held up his index finger. He said, Dennis, every single person on the planet, every single person, the guy that parks your car, the guy sleeping on the park bench, every person can do at least one thing better than 10,000 other people.
Oh.
He said, that's the good news. He said, the bad news is most people don't have any idea what that one thing is. And, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful that I found this stuff, but I don't think you find it on the road of safety. Everybody has a script for their life, and they go, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor, or whatever they're going to be. And, or I'm going to go to work for that company where I get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And I'm never going to have to worry about money and all that. And, we've never really done that. And stepping out like that, there are resources and people and things that show up to help you. And they're just invisible when you're on the road of safety. You can't even see that out there, how cool it is. So
You gotta
anyway,
be
it's been an
open.
adventure for sure.
That is so true. And
Right.
climb every mountain and make sure that you don't fall, but keep climbing,
Yes,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
So
I don't want to live any other way, you know?
so Dennis, you talked a little about your grandmother, but who influenced you in your early days? I assume she was an influence, but who else? And also, who are your influences now?
Well, one of the things I learned after I did a record that was kind of a gospel record, and it got played on the radio in Houston. I heard it all day. If I was driving around, I heard my music on the radio, which was so encouraging. But I really didn't want to do gospel music, and so I made a rock and roll record. Well, when that record came out, I went to my mother's house, and I walked in, and on the bar was a publishing contract, a one song publishing contract, and she had written a song with Floyd Tillman, a famous singer songwriter at the time, and she'd never told me that. And I said, "Mom, you see what I'm doing?" I said, couldn't mention that you had done this." And she said, "Well, and only your mother will say this." She goes, "I really didn't want to encourage you too much, in the music business because it's hard." And she's right; it is hard. And so, but here's my first real musical influence was a guy named Kemper Crabb, a very unusual name. He was and still is one of the most talented people I've ever met. And so he produced my first couple of albums. And, before we started work on the first album, which was a miracle because I had somebody just give us money to go. They loved my music and said, this guy had more money than he needed, apparently, and said, just go make a record and send the bills to me, kind of thing. So Kemper produced it. And about a week before we went in the studio, I was taking voice lessons from his wife, and I had to drive 45 minutes to and 45 minutes from, like you do in Houston sometimes. And so it was late at night. We were walking out to the car, and Kemper had 3 albums under his arm. And I noticed he had them. And he was one of the maybe 3 or 4 people that have ever called me Denny. My grandmother did. My 102-year-old author that I'm going to have lunch with on Wednesday, she calls me Denny, and I don't correct her, by the way. And so we get out to my car, and he said, "Denny, can I just ask a question?" He goes, "Do you think that you're really doing your best work?" And I said, "Well, Kemper, this is a heck of a time to ask that. We're going to the studio next Tuesday." And I said, "So why are you asking me this?" And he said, "Well, look, I trust you." He said, "Whatever you tell me, I'm gonna go with." He said, "But I want to give you these 3 albums to take home with you, and I want you to listen to them. And then I want you to call me tomorrow and tell me if you're doing your best work." And so he sent me home with the first 2 Dan Fogelberg records, Souvenirs, Netherlands, really. And I mean, yeah, I had no chance, right? And then he sent the other record was a Leonard Cohen record, and so I went home with those, and I listened all the way through to all of those. When I got to the Leonard Cohen record, I was emotional. I was thinking, man, my stuff is not like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called him and I said, "You know what, Kemper? First, you made me mad." Okay. I said, "But it took a lot of guts to say that to me." And I said, "That's iron sharpening iron. So one man sharpens another, like Proverbs says." I said, "You know what? I'm going to remember this. And so you call off those sessions. I'm going to go back and revisit my music and these songs and all that." And so we cut some other, so here's the crazy part. So I'm 69 years old now. I was 22 or 3 when we had that conversation. So almost 50 years later, when I'm writing a song, I still hear Kemper. I hear his voice saying, "Hey, Denny, are you doing your best work? Like, don't settle for something that rhymes. Settle for what goes there, and don't stop until you have it," kind of thing. And so, so that probably was my earliest and maybe most important musical influence. Steve Martin said, Charlie Rose or somebody said, "So do you get asked a lot to, you have people come up to you and say, 'Hey, I'm funny, let's can you introduce me to your agent or something? And he goes, well, sometimes that happens, but he goes, if that happens, he said, these people are asking the wrong question. He goes, because here's the right question. He said, make yourself world class at something. Take the time and don't do any shortcuts and become world class at something. And he said, the day you do, he said, the polls change. And he said, you don't have to walk around with your hat in your hand anymore because people start coming to you. And, you think about it, ladies, that guy has done it 3 times. He was the top comedian in the world. He was one of the top movie stars in the world. And now he's one of the top he's a Grammy winning banjo player. I mean, he might be the best banjo player in the world right now. And
really?
so, yes. And so,
He's
you know what? And
terrific.
so he is terrific.
And he's got a new show on TV that I love, Only Murders in the Building.
Yes, absolutely.
You can't
I've only
beat
seen
that.
the first 2 seasons, but I love it. And so,
I love it.
and so that's a lot of it is that pursuit. And I think writers have a switch that goes on that they cannot turn off. I mean, look, all my life I've had people say, "What are you doing? You're sitting in a room when Dancing with the Stars is on, and you could be sitting on your couch and watching TV, and you're in there parsing a word or a phrase in a song or a musical phrase or whatever." And look, it's a compulsion, and I think
an obsession.
You're compelled. It's an obsession. I'm obsessed, and if I start thinking about a song, I'm obsessed with it until it's done. So.
And who else would you consider influenced your life that you learned some things from?
Well, I'll just tell you one more musical thing. So I met sort of again, it felt like it was an accident. Okay. I was at a songwriter event, and the great Allen Shamblin, who wrote I Can't Make You Love Me and The House That Built Me, and he walked on water. He's a Hall of Fame writer. And we met and became great friends. We're still, I texted with him today, and, and he has been a huge influence on me. And I actually got to write a song with him. He kept asking me, I'd known him for probably 10 years. I'd never asked for anything. I never even asked to write with him. And he called me one day while I was driving home from Louisiana. Susie and I were driving back, and he said, how can I help you with your songwriting career? And I said, Alan, look, I'm the one guy who doesn't really, I want to be your friend. I appreciate you, but I don't really need anything. Okay. 1 week later, because I didn't know what I was talking about. That's the truth. And so within 1 week, I sent a song in to this little couple in Nashville, an independent artist who were looking for songs. And they write me this big dim the lights email back, and they say, wow, we love this idea. We think that this could be I Can't Make You Love Me. But we also think you're not done writing this song yet. Are you willing to do some more writing on it? And I thought, well, you know what? I've been singing this song. I even recorded it probably 15 years before that. It was already chronicled somewhere in that form. So what I did is, Alan said, how can I help you? I thought, you know what? I'm going to take him up on that. So I sent that version of the song and their note to him. And I said, you know what, Alan, I don't need your help on anything. I just want to know. I said, listen to this song, read their note, and tell me if they're crazy. Because if they are, I'm not tearing this song apart and redoing it. And so 1 week later, Allen Shamblin called me, this Hall of Fame songwriter. What a gift this is, okay? He called me up today and he said, okay, you might want to sit down. This is going to take a while. He goes, first of all, they're right. This is a great idea. The song is called Worth My Time. And he said, this song talks about giving people who are being abused or verbally or physically abused the strength to say, that's enough. We're not doing this anymore. Okay. And he said, you have to finish writing. Yes. And it does need some more writing. So here's what he says. He goes, you know what? So I'm not going to co-write this with you because nobody knows you. And so, but they know me, and they're going to think you sat in the room while I wrote the song. And so I'm going to be your editor And he said, I'm going to call you every night at 9 o'clock, and I'm going to see what kind of progress you've made on this song today. Well, he was not kidding. And I write about this in my book on communication. So what do you say? And it's the last page. I tell this story. So we get the first 2 verses done and the bridge done. And then I can't get the last verse written. And I wrote 50 last verses, and none of them worked. And he would say, no, you know what? A great song puts you in a trance, and your last verses are taking me out of a trance. You got to figure out how to finish it, right? So we went to it was very tough. And, and people think, oh, why did they even get paid for that? This is just 3 minutes of stuff. They don't know. Okay. So we go up to Nashville, and he and his wife invite us out to their farm for lunch. And I was thinking, man, I hope he doesn't even mention this song. I'm tired of it. We've been doing it for 6 months. I had all these sticky notes on my car dashboard of ideas that I had on the way there. I mean, I was talk about obsessed. And so anyway, we get there, and of course we finished lunch. And of course he says, hey, let's go in my writing room and let's hear that last verse, right? And I get in there, and I was reluctant, but I thought, no, this is a privilege. Remember that. So we get in there, and he hands me a guitar. He said, look, Mac Davis was the last guy to play this guitar, so don't mess it up. Okay. And I sing him the last verse, and he goes, no, that's not it. And I said to him, it's a great, great lesson. Okay. I said, Allen, do you guys write like this? We've been writing this song for 6 months every day. And he reached under his writing room, his table, and he pulled out a big dictionary thick stack of legal paper, all in ballpoint pen, no technology of any kind. And he pushes it across the table to me, and he said, that is one song I've been working on for 7 years.
Yeah.
He said, so you know what? We do write like that. And he said, so stop whining and get back in there and fix this. You finish this song, So anyway, what wound up happening is he called me one day, and we had cried on the phone. We prayed one day on the phone. He was so put out. He was like, you have to do this. Well, anyway, so one day I had it. I had enough. And I said, you know what, Allen? I said, do you know what this last verse might be? And he goes, I probably do. I said, well, then why in the world don't you write it and put us out of our misery? Okay. And he goes, okay, give me 2 weeks. He leaves the phone for 5 minutes, and he comes back and he calls me. He goes, what about this? Is it worth this pain and your words that bruise? Should I be the one you love to use? If I have to ask, then I should know that it's worth my time to let you go. Are you kidding me?
Oh.
And I said, you thought of that in 2 minutes? And he said, well, my sword is sharper than yours.
Oh.
I do this. I love you, but you know what? You don't do this every single day like me. And he said, and so there, we're done. Go cut a demo of this, and let's see if we get somebody to record it. And so I finally put it on a record a couple of years ago myself. But he's been a huge influence. He's taught me how to not try to figure out what the market needs and all that, but to just write from the heart, basically.
Yeah. Is that what you learned? I mean, can you pinpoint exactly what you learned from that?
Well, one thing I learned is there's no shortcuts to greatness. We live in a culture, and I think humans are sort of wired. This is what worries me about AI, by the way, but that's another show. Is that it's easy to go ask some faceless thing that doesn't know you to say, could you write that for me? And they write something that's pretty good, and you there you go. But somebody said this week. Somebody said that Neil deGrasse Tyson said this, and I think this is really, I'm still reeling from hearing it. But he said, if Einstein had not discovered the theory of relativity, somebody would have down the road. Okay. Some scientist would have figured it out. He goes, but if Monet had decided not to paint, there would never be a Monet painting. Isn't that profound? And
Mhm.
and so, to be really great at something, you can't take a shortcut. You got to do the hard stuff. You got to outwork everybody. You got to spend time in a room by yourself and figure it out. And so that's really the lesson, Mary, that I learned was don't, no matter how tempting it is, don't just rhyme something because you want to finish a song and go to the next one. Figure out
Mhm.
how to make that song the most impactful that it can be, and then you can be satisfied with that, and you can move ahead to something else. So
That
that was a
that
good
is a
lesson.
lesson for any artist out there, or
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
And
anybody
you.
Dennis,
a project.
there was a period when you didn't record, but you wrote songs.
Yes.
And how did that change you and the work you're doing now?
Well, look, you know what? I was so disappointed. I had a chance to go out as a bass tech with a band that was opening for Billy Squire and another band. And I'd never toured like that. And my kids were little. And I'd been with them 24 hours. I was mama daddy, and my wife was working and doing stuff, we're all trying to keep the lights on and all that. Well, I only lasted 3 weeks on that tour, Kathy. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I can do this. And I called the manager who hired me. And the band was King's X, spectacular 3-piece band, by the way. And I called this guy and I said, hey, man, I said, look, I've never been drunk and I've never taken drugs. And I said, I'm going to tell you something. I said, if I stay out here a year, which is how long this is going to be, I'm afraid I'm going to be doing both. And it's probably going to kill me. And I said, so I got to figure this out. He goes, well, he was so sweet. And he said, look,
Mm.
why don't you go out to the airport? I'll have a ticket waiting on you. Come home. He goes, sometimes the ladder of success is against the wrong wall. So come
Oh,
home and figure it out.
oh,
And he said, isn't
Yeah.
that profound? And he said, look, but I'm going to ask
I
you to
like
do
that.
something for me because you kind of owe me. He goes, please don't stop writing songs. And so I kept writing. First, I didn't write. I was mad about the whole thing. And I took a year and I didn't write a word. And then I wrote a song called Jacob's Ladder that explained everything to me. And then I made an album in 95. I made an album in 2000. And I made a decision when I walked out of the studio. I came home and I told Susie, I said, I'm not going back in the studio again until I find somebody who can help. That's an arranger. I'm not an arranger. I'm a writer, a producer, a real producer who can elevate this material. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go back and do a B minus. And not that this was B minus, but we can do better, right? And so I didn't know what I was saying because I went 18 years without that. And so one day I came home and I told Susie I was in my mid 60s, and I said, you know what? I got a problem. I said, I'm worried about dying and all of this material being in a drawer somewhere, and people and the kids just throwing it out because they don't really know what it is. And she said, well, you have that prayer list that you pray through every morning for an hour with all these other people on it. Why don't you put something on there for yourself? That's a novel idea. So I did. And within 90 days, I'm driving through Nashville, and we went to dinner with a friend of ours who's a super crazy talented guy who had been the guitar player in Little River Band for 18 years. He's just a gifted, humble person who can do anything musically. And we're sitting across the table from each other. I didn't make this happen, by the way. I'm just having dinner. And he looks at me and he goes, what are you working on? Because I know you're always working on something. And I said, well, his name is Rich Herring. I said, well, Rich, I got a new song Susie likes a lot. She thinks it's the best thing I've ever written. And he goes, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I don't know what to do with it. That's the problem. And he goes, well, why don't you sing it for me? I said, right here in the restaurant? He goes, right now, sing it a cappella for me. And so I sang the first verse and chorus to Why Not Me. And he put his hand up. He was emotional. And he said, you stop now. Okay. He said, Susie's right as usual. Okay. And second of all, I'm supposed to help you with this. Did you know this? And I said, no, I didn't. And he goes, okay, let's cut this song. And I said, you want some hotshot Nashville singer to sing on this? He goes, no, I want you to sing on it. So we recorded that song. It was immediately the best thing I'd ever done. We did a second song about forgiveness called I Can't Remember, and that was also right there at the top. And he called me after that, and he goes, look, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know when something special is going on. And he goes, I didn't know you had this kind of material. He goes, let's make an album. So we made an album, came out in 21, called What Love Makes Us Do. And it was on the first Grammy ballot in 5 categories. And then 23, If I Live to Be 100, also on the first Grammy ballot in 5 categories. I'm not going to win a Grammy, but somebody inside NARAS thought it was worthy. And then right now, my new album, Strong, is going to. So we've recorded 3 albums and released them in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you're in your 60s now and having a musical renaissance of sorts. Yes. So tell our boomer audience your thoughts on aging.
Well, look, I think that most of what we're told, let me see how to say this. If you don't proactively plan to be doing something that matters in your 60s, the momentum of the culture will sweep you out to pasture. And that's a shame. There's a lot of people, most of us are better than we were when we were 30. We're wiser. We have more contacts. More people will take our phone calls. We know more. And
we agree with you on that.
Well,
Mary
I'm sure you do, and you should agree, because it's the truth. Yeah. And I think a lot of what we hear in the culture is a bald-faced lie. And so, you know what? I just have chosen not to believe it. I go to the gym 5 days a week to take care of myself. And I'm not doing that so I can live to be 100. I'm doing that so that right now, while I'm doing what I'm doing in this world, that I can be good at it still, that I can still feel great and feel some energy to do it. And so, and it's one of the themes, Kathy, that comes up almost every interview I do. People say, what? You're 69 years old and you're going on tour now. That's the other thing. We're leaving. We've discovered house concerts. And I mean, people have invited us. We're going to Maine and Connecticut and Nashville and all over doing house concerts with people who've invited us to come to their house, and they fill it up with people, and we have a ball. So
how is doing concerts now different than when you were younger?
Oh, this is a lot more fun.
Is it harder physically or not?
No, it's not. Because here's the thing. I think when you plug into that thing that you're here for, there's a lot of energy there, And I did one Saturday night and in Houston, album release party, and there were people packed into the room, and they were from the widest swath in my life. So people from my high school were there, people from my first church were there, my family, my grandkids were there. I mean, there was just this broad, and it was just joyful. I mean, I did 90 minutes and I felt like I hadn't done anything. And I think it's
that's great.
I think, a lot of people think, oh, I just couldn't do that. It's like, well, who told you that? You should ignore the naysayers. And
yeah, great advice. Tell us more about your album, Strong, and how did that come about?
Well, Strong. So we were, we've hit another gear now, Rich and I have, because we've done a lot of work together, and there's no drama. It's so easy to do. Well, we thought we had the title track, Relentlessly, which is crazy. What he did with that song is crazy. Anyway, I thought that was the title track, and Susie did too. So right before we went up to cut the last 3 vocals, so we go back and forth from Texas to Tennessee, and I sat down at my little piano, and I started doing some work on the piano now, which I've never done before, and certainly not writing. And recently I've been doing more of it. And when I sat down, I heard this, not actual voice, but just something in here that said, for an optimist and a man of faith, you sure live a fearful life. And so why don't you stop living a fearful life? 99% of what you worry about has never happened to you, and it never will. And why don't you write your manifesto? And so I wrote Strong. For too long, I've been fearing the shadows and running from the wind and feeling like I'm bound to lose again, and so and so I wrote it in 2 days.
Those are some of the lyrics,
Song?
what
Yes,
you
ma'am.
just said?
Yeah.
Are those some of the lyrics? Okay.
Yes.
Good. Good.
Yeah. And so the first two choruses are, I want to be strong. I want to feel invincible. For once in my life, I want to feel like the battle is winnable. But then it has this bridge that says, when tomorrow's sun is rising, I'll still be standing. And with a faithful heart, I'll carry on. And then it changes keys and it sings, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be invincible. Anyway, I can't tell you the reaction.
Do all of your songs on Strong have to do with that type of, what you said, a manifesto, your manifesto?
No, Mary, you know what? I like to think about, even in my gigs, I like to think about this. I have a song called Blind. It is such an unhappy love song. And I really have to assume a persona for that because I've been in love. I met Susie on a blind date. I've never gotten over it. But this song Blind is about she's gone basically. And so, but what I think, if you think about paintings, a painting doesn't work if it's all bright. And, it doesn't work like that. You got to have some things in there to give it some shadow and all that. And so let me just say this. It's a very hopeful message, mostly. And I think people will leave this album and also these gigs, they'll leave hopeful. I mean, I heard from some people secondhand that were there Saturday night that said, wow, this is making me rethink what I'm doing. And these were not kids that were saying this. And so, that's what my hope is. Somebody asked me, a Nashville publishing person said, how would you define success for what you're doing? And I said, look, success for me is saying for people what they can't say for themselves. They don't know how. And that causing a conversation that helps them get through whatever it is they're getting through. And she said, wait, you didn't mention money, and you didn't mention hit records, and you didn't mention charts. You didn't mention any of that stuff. And I said, look, if that stuff happens, of course I'm fine with that. I said, but that cannot be the focus for me. I just can't. And I said, my focus is to hopefully touch people's hearts and encourage them.
That's a real blessing that you feel that way, because it makes you can find happiness so much easier having that as your definition of success. You're going to be happy much easier. You're always going to meet people that you're touching as you go out to these concerts and stuff. That's perfect. Yeah. And what do you have to say to our boomer audience out there who might have a lifelong dream, but maybe they think it's too late to try to achieve it?
Wow. Well, I'm the right guy to say it, but I'll tell you something. I've got a 102-year-old author, and she called me yesterday, and she's one of the ones who calls me Denny. And she called me up. She said, Denny, I got a new book, right? I'm like,
wow.
What?
Wow.
I thought you couldn't see. She's had macular degeneration, but you know what she did? She went to the Association for the Blind here in Austin and said, hey, I need some help here. And when she found out she could get help, Kathy, you know what she said? This is a writer, okay? We're sitting at her dining room table with her publisher and me, and she had written 10 books in her late 80s and early 90s, and not early, all through her 90s that were spectacular. She's a fantastic writer, okay? Babette Hughes is her name. So she goes, you know what? I think maybe my writing career is over because I've got macular degeneration. I can't see. And her young publisher goes, wait, Babette, this Society for the Blind is here in town. They can help you. And you know what her first statement was? Her first statement was, oh, this is so great because now I won't burn the house down when I cook, or I won't trip and fall, or any of the things that you would think of, right?
Yeah.
She goes, oh, this is such good news. I got some short stories I want to do. And I'm like, what? And so she has written a book on aging is what she's done. And she said, you know what? Nobody else 102. There's no better authority than me, okay? Because I've done it. And so,
what does she call that book? Because I think we should all get it.
We haven't titled it yet.
Oh, so
We
it's
haven't.
not out yet.
No, that's
Not
not
out
out
yet.
yet. No. She's
Yeah.
just. I'm going over there tomorrow to have lunch with her so she can tell me all about it. And so I think it's if you look, what you believe informs what you do, right?
Oh.
And so I'm very careful about what I take in. I don't sit and watch the news all day and hear people argue about politics and stuff, and Facebook people go on rants. Okay, I just don't have any interest in that, and I don't need that. What I need is I need encouragement. I need somebody to tell me the truth about what's happening. And so, but if you let that stuff in, it's poison, and it will stop you from being. It'll stop you from being what you are supposed to be. And look, this sounds maybe spiritual, and I'm okay if it does, but I think everybody's here for a reason, really. That you're uniquely wired to do something that nobody else can do in this world that needs you, right? And so what a tragedy when people get to a certain age and go, well, I could have done that and I decided not to do it. I'll tell you a quick story. My guitar player that was my rock and roll guitar player is the best blues guitar player I ever heard. Okay. Well, he has not been doing well. He's down in Houston. He's living with his daughter. He's been having a little issue with dementia and some things like that. And I called him and I said, hey, Skip, I'm playing Saturday night in Houston. I want you to come do our blues song. Come do New York City with me. He goes, oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do it. He goes, my hands won't do what they used to do. And he gave me all the excuses why he couldn't. And I said, well, look, what if I make you come? And he said, well, you can't make me, but he goes, but if you ask me, I'm going to do it. And I said, okay. I said, I'm asking. So he came Saturday night and I called him up. His son helped him set up his amp and everything. And he sat down at this guitar, girls, and he started playing. And it was like angels from heaven. It was so beautiful. And when it was over, I said to him, Skip, who is telling you? I said, you know what? You should be down doing open mic nights. You should be playing 3 or 4 nights a week doing this work because you haven't lost a single step. But somebody's told you or you believe something that's not true. And so a lot of it is getting past the barriers that we set up for ourselves. And I've told this guy Rich Herring producing my records, I said, listen, as long as I'm able to stand up and get to your house and get to your studio and and sing, and my brain is okay. I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to do a record every 2 years. So, I mean, that's what I want to do. And I think I can do it. And it's making me write more at this age. I'm writing a lot more now than I was when I was 30. So you have to believe the right things.
It's fabulous.
Yes. It's just
fabulous advice.
Inspiring to everyone listening. I'm inspired. And I can't wait to hear more of Strong and all of the work that you do.
Thank you.
Is Strong out now on all the streaming music services?
Well, that's just a wonderful question, Kathy. You know what? It was supposed to come out last Wednesday. And because I've written 2 songs with a pretty famous artist, the distributor comes back to my record company and says, we're going to need some kind of note, at least signed by Michael Peterson and Dennis Welch, to say that they wrote this together so that we can prove it. Because you can imagine now with streaming, I can say, hey, I wrote a song with Katy Perry and I can put it up on streaming. And by the time a week goes by and you sold 100,000 downloads, they find out it's Katy Perry, your next door neighbor or something. And so I can see it being a problem. And so I understand why they did it. And so we quickly signed a little thing and sent it in. And hopefully any day now, today is Tuesday, right? So probably within the next couple of days, it'll be on. And this is what I love about music now, is that my record company pushes a button and it goes to the whole world. It's global. People you don't know are listening to your music. And so.
And do you ever get letters from them?
Yes, I do. I friended a guy on Facebook that I recognized. I recognized this guy's name, but I don't know where from. But I know that he's the top radio promotion guy in contemporary Christian music now. And so he accepted my friend request, and I did an album called Man of Steel. That was my rock and roll album. Went everywhere, and so anyway, and so I said, hey, you want to Zoom and talk about? I'd like to know what you're doing. So we get on the call, and you know what the first thing he said, Mary, to me? He looked straight at me, and you could tell he was emotional. He said, listen, you probably don't even know who I am. He goes, I was a young disc jockey in Syracuse, New York, when the Man of Steel LP came in, and he said, I put the arm down on that LP, and he said, it changed my life.
Whoa.
And I was, because look, all artists have an amp that sit on their shoulder that says, why are you even bothering to do this? Nobody cares. I mean, every author I've ever worked with, every musician, it's all that kind of like, nobody really cares about this stuff. And then you hear something like that. And so I do hear from people from time to time, Mary, and it's always a very humbling,
Well, I hope that all of our listeners gain that type of accolade from at least one person after listening to this podcast. Thank you so much, Dennis.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our guest today on Late Boomers has been songwriter, recording artist, and author Dennis Welch. If you want to connect with Dennis and learn more about him and where to see him perform or listen to his music and buy his music, go to his website, DennisWelchMusic.com, and I'll spell it. That's DennisWelch music, MUSIC.com. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to our Late Boomers podcast and subscribing to our Late Boomers podcast channel on YouTube. Listen in next week when you'll meet the former First Lady of Nice, France, Eileen Medecin. You can listen to Late Boomers on any podcast platform and look at our new website, lateboomers.us, where you can find all our episodes and descriptions. Please follow us on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. And thanks again to Dennis Welch.
Thank you. Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.us. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.